All right then. So let's come together this week and just focus a little bit more on what is it that we trust in? What is it that we rely upon? Where is our treasure? Where is our heart? You know, we've talked about how our journey is one of getting our head, which is our intellect, our heart, which is our emotions, and our subconscious or subjective mind. Some people like to call it subliminal because it is not unconscious, but it is below a level of our conscious mind's awareness. And our actions, how do we get those all aligned and moving in the same direction? Well, that is peace, and that is comfort, that is happiness. And what is that direction in which we want to go? What is that direction that we want to move in? What is it, if you will, that we are seeking? What is it that we hope to find? And all those things are very important. All those things are, in fact, the very stuff and substance of life. There's something in the Old Testament that says, keep with diligence the matters of your heart, for such is the substance of life. And I'm kind of paraphrasing there. I don't remember it exactly. But keep with diligence the matters of your heart. That's what you believe at a level so deep that you probably not even aware that you believe it. Right? These are the things, the deepest values that we hold. The subconscious, if you will, subjective, excuse me. And it's interesting to see, as we observe ourselves and we observe life, that many times what the head says it wants to do and what the heart believes in, what the heart believes is appropriate, are two different things. And that sets up a conflict, and that sets up a struggle in our lives. Excuse me while I get a drink of water here. You know, it's easy to see how much in individual lives we talk about diet and exercise. We talk about dedicating more time to our spiritual practice, spending more time with our families. There are all these things that we want to do at an intellectual level, but yet we don't seem to be able to get around to doing them. And the reason for that is the head and the heart are not aligned. So as we've been talking for the last couple of weeks, life is truly a matter of intention and attention. Intention is what it is that you want to experience. What is it that you would like to have happen now? It's a key question. Get out a notebook this afternoon, sit down, and write across the top, what is it that I want to have happen now? And jot down your ideas. That's your intention. And then we look at our attention. What are we paying attention to? Are we paying attention to the things that we want to have happen, or are we paying attention to everything else that's going on in the world? Right? Emmett Fox says the way out of any problem, and I would add to that the way into any opportunity, because I don't like talking about problems all the time. Life is not just a big problem that we need to solve. Right? Life is a joyful experience that we need to have. I don't know if you saw the quote from Joseph Campbell. People have been posting on Facebook this week, and it's a famous quote from him. And he says, people talk about the purpose of life. And what Campbell said, he says, I think the purpose of life is not kind of a specific something that we're here to do, but rather the purpose of life is to experience living. That what we are looking for, what we are seeking, is just the experience of being alive in its totality. What is that? To be in the moment, to be aware, to be conscious, to be alive, to be fully aligned with our intention and our attention. So what we want to look at a little bit is this business of where is our heart? What is it that we truly rely upon? What is it that we trust? Because what we trust, that is where our heart is. Intellectually, we talk about God is our source, our substance, and our supply, that everything that comes to us and comes through us is divine action. The food we eat, the water we drink, the air we breathe, the money we spend, it all is some part of God's divine right action in our lives. We say that. But do we believe that? Do we rely on that? Do we trust that? Is that where our heart is? Or do we trust the Dow Jones? Do we trust the activity of Wall Street? Do we trust the policy that the governments pass? Do we trust that if we let the rich get richer, that somehow we will as well? What is it that we truly believe in? What is it truly that we trust in? And you can see that in the actions in the world. You can see that in what people give their attention to. And when it comes to health, it's the same way. We think of health as being the perfect activity of God in our lives. But what do we focus on? Where is our heart? Is it in the latest craze? Is it in the latest diet pill? Is it in the health food stores? Is it in the produce aisle? What is our idea of health? Are we looking for it in a doctor's office, under the surgeon's knife? What is our idea of health? So what we have to recognize is this. What we want to come to kind of grips with is this, and we need to do this on a regular basis in our life. Or in our lives, we need to stop and ask ourselves, what is the most important thing in my life? What is the most important thing? If I could accomplish or experience just one thing for the whole rest of my life, if there was only one thing that I wanted to be sure, if you wanted to have your bucket list and there's only one thing on that list, what is that thing? What is that most important thing in your life, in your experience, and what are you here for? And I would have to go along with Joseph Campbell. I would have to say that what we are here for is the experience of living. But the idea of the experience of living that I'm talking about is not the human idea of the experience of living, not the glorification of busy, not the accumulation of materials, goods, and services and stuff, not dying with the most toys. But the very experience of living that I'm talking about is the experience of being a conscious part of the life of God, to experience the very presence of the divine, to rip away, if you will, the layers of labels and distractions, beliefs that we have put upon ourselves and accepted and bought into, that I am this or I am that or I am the other thing, and to let all of that dissolve away, because all of that is dissolving away. To bring ourselves to the complete, or as complete as we can experience, that I am. That the I am is living as me. That what I am is some part of the very presence of the very experience of God here on this earth. And all of these other ideas that serve to lead us astray, if you will, to allow us to be distracted from our purpose. That all of these other ideas are just passing fancies. And that what we wish to focus on is the complete experience of the presence of God in us, as us, and through us. And I think that, for me, is the most important thing. Nothing else matters. Not in comparison. Nothing else matters. St. Paul puts it this way. He says, what does it profit a person to gain the whole world and lose his or her soul? Now, I'm not thinking of that in terms of a heaven and a hell and a condemnation and a punishment and all of those things that we may have learned as children. But to lose our soul, I believe, means to fail to discover the miracle that is already there, the presence that is already there, the love and the peace that is already there, that is just trying to make its way into the experience of this world. But it needs outlets. Emerson said we are inlets of the divine that may become outlets of the divine. We may become outlets of the divine. Well, how can we do that? How can we be, intellectually we would all stand up and sing and light the candle and say, yes, this little light of mine, I am going to let it shine. But is that where our heart is? Is that what we truly believe? Now, how do we do that? How do we become that outlet so that the peace and the love and the joy and the comfort that is part of the very experience of God? I want you, if you can, get some time to read of the lives of the mystics. Rumi is one of my favorites, but there are others. Teresa of Avila, St. John of the Cross, there are others. If you want to look at it at a secular level, read Richard Maurice Buck's Cosmic Consciousness. And read what people have written. Brother Lawrence's Practicing the Presence is a very, very short and very practical book that was written around 1300. And it's applicable today because God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And these people are writing about what it is like to be aware, consciously aware, of the experience of the presence of the divine. And I think that is what we have come here to this place at this time to do. That is the treasure. That is where our heart ought to be, if that is our treasure. And not all of the other things that we give our attention to, that we give our time and our energy to, that we allow ourselves to be distracted with. Many years ago, our church in Durham, the board went up to a little ashram up in Buckingham Courthouse, Virginia. It's called Yogaville. And Yogaville was actually founded by some of the same people who put on Woodstock. the Swami who founded it was actually the Swami who came out at Woodstock and led the crowd in Hindu chants to kind of calm them down while they were waiting for the roadies and the acts to get everything going. But it was a very different place. A little community all its own, has its own post office, has its own school, and a lot of cottage industries with people working from home. There's a little hotel where people can go and stay. And people actually pay to go there and live there for a year to serve the community, to do their spiritual growth through service, the yoga of service. And while we were there, while we were having our retreat, they actually sent people into, they gave us a building all to ourselves. And we slept there, we ate there, we had our meetings there. And these people who actually had paid in order to have the privilege to serve, they came in and they were feeding us and they were taking care of us. And of course we wanted to get up and help with the dishes and do all the things that politeness tells us to do. And this one young lady stopped and she said, if you help me, you're denying me what I came here to do. You're denying me the opportunity to learn how to grow through service. And I said, wow. Now there's dedication. There is dedication to the experience. And the belief that this path of service was the path that would lead to the experience that she was seeking. And a commitment to not only give up a year of her life, but to pay for the privilege to go there and do that. And as I was walking around the grounds outside the building that we were in, this building is on the banks of the James River, so it's kind of steep, and wooded and steep, and there's little trails all around. And as I was walking around, I looked into the side of a hill, and there was the modern equivalent of a cave. There was a one-room little stone shack, if you want to call it that was built right into the side of the hill. You had to come down a very, 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 very steep path to get to it. There was just one door, and it was open. It was like a place where a window should be, but there was no window in there. There was just this opening. And I went in there and I looked out, and the view that this little room had was straight across the valley, down the hill, across the rolling James River, up the other side, and all these beautiful woodlands. And I kind of imagined what it might be like for someone to go there and spend a year of their life in this place, doing nothing but consciously communing, consciously inviting themselves to experience the presence of the divine. See, I think what we have to realize is God is already here. Excuse me. The divine is already here. The presence is already here. God is omniscience, all-knowing, and omnipresence, everywhere present. So Joel Goldsmith asks us to consider, if God is perfect peace and God is everywhere present, then why isn't perfect peace everywhere present? And the answer that he gives us is that the presence of God has to be realized. It has to be realized. It has to come into the human experience through the point of realization, through the realization of consciousness. And not just an intellectual awareness. Oh yes, of course, God is everywhere present, so God must be here. But through the activity of our heart, through the full alignment of our emotions and our beliefs and the dissolution of our fears and our doubts. I asked before, what do we trust? What do we rely on? You know, it's interesting, if you look at our dollar bill, on the back it says, in God we trust. But do we? Or do we trust the Fed? Do we trust the printing press? Do we truly trust in God? So to realize the presence of God, to be a point in realization where not only intellectually do we understand that God is everywhere present, which means that God is present right here where I am, and God is present right in the midst of these tragic situations that we see going on in the news. But God must be realized, must be experienced. So if we step back and ask ourselves, excuse me, if my purpose in life is to experience the livingness, to experience the presence, to be an active instrument, the prayer of St. Francis, O Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. To be that active instrument of God's love, to be that outlet where God's love flows to us and flows through us without us having to even try to do it, without us having to go out and make a big show of it, if you will. But to simply be that beautiful instrument of God's love that we came here to be, we must first realize it. Goldsmith tells us this in his works over and over and over. He says, you must understand it, and then you must demonstrate it. And only then can you share it. Because if you try to share it before you actually demonstrate it in your life, you're not sharing your experience, you're sharing an intellectual knowledge. You're sharing something that may or may not be true. You may not understand it. So before we try to go give away what we don't have, what we must do is dedicate ourselves to experiencing it, to opening ourselves up to be that point of livingness, that point where the very presence of God is living its life as us and through us. And it relies only upon itself. Only upon its own self. Its heart is with itself, not with anything else, not with anyone else, not on circumstances which are constantly changing, not on political points of views which are constantly changing, not on the boundary lines of maps which are constantly changing, but only upon itself. The omnipotence, the omniscience, the same yesterday, today, and forever. So if we consider that what we really want out of life, if we only had one thing to put on our bucket list, that one thing would be to experience more fully every moment of every day the very presence, the very awareness of the presence, the very realization of the presence of God within us, around us, and through us. If that is our intention, then we can come back and ask ourselves, well, where is my heart? Where is my heart? Is my attention on that, or is my attention on everything else? What we have to step away from, if you will, or to step back and take a look at, is the belief of the world, the belief of human consciousness or race consciousness, and where it is and where we want to be, and whether we want to be part of it or we want to be an observer of it, but observing it in a non-judgmental manner, in a manner that allows us to grow and to be a blessing to it, to be a gift to it. Not that we run and try to save people or keep them from themselves. We have to understand that each and every one is working out his or her own salvation or illumination or enlightenment, however you want to call it. And they each have to be left alone to do that because no one can do it for them. And that, I believe, is a key point that we have to bring ourselves to, is that we are the only ones responsible. We are the only ones accountable, and we are the only ones who can do this in our own lives. Our mythology of our human race is filled with the mythology of somebody is going to come and do it for us. Somebody's going to come and rescue us. Somebody is going the fairy godmother is going to come with the magic wand and tap us on the shoulder, and all of the wrongs that we have ever experienced in our life are going to be gone. Captain America or the superheroes are going to come and save us. Superman is going to come and bail us out. Or some spiritual guru, some savior is going to come and bail us out. We have to step back and say to ourselves, no one can do it for us but us. People can show us the way. People can point us in the right direction. But really only people who have been there and done that. We don't want to follow the idea of those who are just telling us what they read from a book. But people who have opened their hearts and invited in the very experience and the very presence of God. As Goldsmith tells us, all any of us can do, any of us, all we can do is to discover some part of God and to freely share what we've discovered, because it's not our own. We didn't make it. We didn't create it. But it is just something that has been given to us freely. And as we share freely of what we have been given, we receive more. Now, if we try to give as a way of forcing God to give us more, of course that doesn't work. Because our attention is on getting, not on giving. But if our focus is on giving freely of what we have discovered, then we create a greater opening within us to discover more. So in our society, not only does it reinforce in us over and over and over again the idea that somehow somebody else is going to come and do it for us, and we understand that cannot be, right? No one can change your consciousness for you, and what is required is a change in consciousness. You have to allow the change or changes within your own consciousness as must be in order for that which is already here to be realized. You can't make God come down and do any more than God would already do. But you can realize the presence. But you can only realize the presence to the degree that you will open yourself up to it, and that you will turn away. Emmett Fox says, turn away. Turn away from everything that looks like the problem and turn your full attention to God. And I would say when you're seeking an opportunity, you turn away from everything that tells you why that won't work, and turn your attention fully on God. What is it that God is trying to experience here through me right now, as me? What is that? And can I accept that? And can I allow that to happen? So our society convinces us that somebody else is somehow going to be able to do it for us, and we must accept the fact that can't be. We must accept the fact that others have shown us the way, others have pointed us in the right direction, others have had the experience and done their very best to try to tell us about the experience that cannot be described in words. But at the end of the day, we must be willing to go there ourselves. And no one can come and pour a whole bucket of love over us. We will not experience any more love than we had before. For that is something that must come through us. So we recognize that we are responsible for what we are thinking. We have the ability to choose what we are thinking. We are not victims. We have the responsibility and the ability to choose, but we also are held accountable for that which we choose to give our attention to. Not held accountable, again, in a punishing sort of way, but we are held accountable by the law of mind, by the law that does it to us according to our belief. We cast our bread upon the waters and they come back. Our word shall not return unto us void. What you give out, you get back. So our society kind of leads us to believe that there is something known as responsibility without accountability. That somehow there can be an assignment of responsibility, but none of the consequences that go with having been responsible. We typically try to find somebody to blame when something goes wrong. We try to assign responsibility. But that doesn't necessarily mean that anything significant changes. Right? I mean, watch the news. Watch what happens in the news, and something goes wrong. And the first thing that the media tries to do, that human consciousness, as expressing through the media, tries to do, is find somebody to blame. And there's this great press to find somebody to blame, and then usually once we find out who that is, if you start to look at what happens after that, is the interest in whatever the situation was tends to diminish. It tends to go away because, okay, well, we found somebody to blame. Now we can move on. That's like level one thinking. That's level one human consciousness. You know, in business, we would say, well, why did something go wrong? We would be doing root cause analysis, and somebody would say, well, somebody screwed up. And we would say, oh, okay. So you fired him? Yeah, we fired him. All right, done. You know, nobody would ever ask the next question, well, why did we have a process in place that allowed that person to screw it up? Where were the procedures? Where was the supervisor? Those questions don't get asked. What happens is somebody screwed up, we fired him. In politics, somebody resigns, you know, those kind of things. You might remember, for those of you who are around back in the 80s or so, you know, that we had a great political scandal, and it wouldn't go away. And finally, the President of the United States came forward and he said famous words, you know, I'm the one responsible. It happened on my watch. And everybody said, oh, okay, he took responsibility. That's great. What changed after that? What changed was nothing changed after that. So my point is that in human consciousness, there is this idea that there's responsibility without accountability. That we can assign blame to somebody who may have not even had anything to do with what was going on. But as long as we find somebody to blame, it kind of takes the sting out of what's going on, and the world loses interest. But we live in a spiritual world of cause and effect. You cannot be responsible under the law of gravity without also being accountable. You cannot step off the edge of a cliff and say, yes, I did that. I am responsible. I stepped off the edge of the cliff, without experiencing the accountability, the consequences of having gravity pull you down to the ground and hurting you. And what we must do if we are to experience the fullness of life and the fullness of experiences is we have to understand the responsibility and the accountability of our consciousness go together. We can't think one thing and experience another. We can't believe in our heart one thing and experience another. Where our heart is, that is where our treasure is. So we must come to understand that whatever the circumstances in our lives may be, that we ultimately are the only ones responsible and the only ones accountable. We are the only ones who can change the situation. And I realize that this gets sensitive because sometimes people say, well, something happened to me. Someone else did something to me. And that is true, and I would not try to diminish it or sweep it under the table. Terrible things happen, and terrible things should not have happened. But we are responsible for changing the way we feel about it. That we can accept responsibility for. We can accept the fact that because we continue to live with the consciousness, we continue to experience the resentment and the frustration and those things that go with it. So we are the only ones who can change what happened. We can accept the responsibility for changing. We can accept the accountability of what happens when we change. So we are the only ones. We are the only thinkers in our universe. No one else can ride in on a white horse and carry us away to the castle and bring us to that thing which we desire most, the very experience of God. We are the only ones who can do that. We are the only one possibly who can do that. We can follow the lead of those who have gone before us. We can read, we can study, we can listen. But most of all, we have to do our spiritual practice. We have to become aware of what we are aware of. We have to ask ourselves, really? Really? Am I living my life? Am I giving my time and my attention to the most important thing? To the most important thing in my life? The experience of the presence of God. In everything I do, as everything I do, not just for 20 minutes twice a day, but mindfully, every minute of every second of every day. And when our mind wanders, which it will, this is where we learn to meditate. We learn the discipline of bringing our mind back. Discipline, you can think of, the shepherd had the stick with the big hook on it, and when the little lambs would wander off too far from the flock, from when they were walking, the shepherd would just reach out with that little hook and kind of gently guide the lamb back until the lamb learned to stay with the flock. So discipline is kind of shepherding our thoughts. The shepherds in the Bible were people who paid attention to their thoughts. Can we shepherd our thoughts? Can we be aware of what we are aware of? Can we start our day in the morning? Can we start our day deliberately, consciously, by recognizing the miracle of what has just occurred? We have awakened. We have opened our eyes. We have a whole day ahead of us. We have a whole day to experience the livingness of God in us, as us, around us, and through us. We have a whole day to become aware, more so than we were yesterday, of the presence and the activity of God. And that is the most important thing that we can do that day, to realize the presence of God. And it is not just in that fleeting moment when we awaken and we begin our spiritual practice. It is not just in the times that we deliberately sit and meditate and do nothing more in our meditation than to invite ourselves to experience the presence of God, not to tell God what God needs to do or anything like that, but just to invite ourselves to experience God. But also we can realize that every minute of every day, every activity in which we engage is an activity of the presence of the divine. The very food that we eat is a sacred meal. The very air that we exchange with the plants and the animals is the gift of life circulating through us. The miracle of a glass of water, so abundant on the face of the planet and so essential to our ability to live. How did our bodies evolve in order to use it? Or was it put there in full knowledge that we would need it? How did this miracle of life unfold? Can we be aware when each and every person comes into our presence during the day, our clients, our customers, our co-workers, that they too are the very presence of God, who have come into our life for a reason? It may seem like a transactional human reason to get something done, but there's always a deeper reason. There's always a spiritual reason. When I was still working in corporate America, I had times in my life where people would come into my office, people who didn't work in my department, people from somewhere else in the organization, and they would come into my office and say, "Do you have a minute?" And I'd say yes. And they'd say, "Well, can I close the door?" And I'd say yes. And they'd shut the door and they would come in and sit down and say, "I have no idea why I'm talking to you, but something within me led me to you, and I need to share this with you. And I need your advice. I need your guidance." And here was pretty much a total stranger who had absolutely no official business in my department. But they were opening up their soul. And they were asking that presence within me, not that I am such a wonderful person, but that the presence within me, they knew that the presence within me would be able to speak to the presence within them. That's what they sensed. That's what they felt. That's what they were there for. So as we renew our commitment to experiencing the presence of God, as we come to ourselves and say yes or no, maybe we're not ready to do that, but hopefully it's yes. The most important thing in my life is to experience the presence of God and the activity of God in my life, and to allow that to grow within me so that it can be a blessing to the world. See, politics is not going to solve the world's problem. It never has and it never will. It probably is the world's problem. War is not going to solve the world's problems. It never has and it never will. But the activity of God, the presence of God will. But the activity of God and the presence of God needs outlets. It already has billions of inlets, but what it needs is conscious, deliberate outlets. Individuals who are willing to dedicate their lives to having that experience and then allowing that experience within them to do what it needs must be in this world. To pass the light on. To help others to awaken. So if we can come to a place where we say, yes, that is my treasure. My treasure, the most important thing in my life, my treasure is to experience the presence and the activity of God. Then what we do is we ask our heart to get in line, we'll probably find out that it's our heart bringing our head in line. Either way is okay. But we want to get ourselves lined up so that where our treasure is, we place our heart. And what that means is that as much as we can every minute of every day, that we bring our attention, we bring our emotion, we bring our feelings to the realization that God is already present, doing its good to the best that it can through the avenues of consciousness that we human beings have provided. And that as that avenue of consciousness grows through us and through all of the other hearts that are crying out for the experience of peace, for the experience of comfort, for the experience of supply, for all of the very things that are the consequences of the experience of the presence of God, that as that consciousness grows, as that realization of God consciousness grows, then the experience of the activity in the human race grows. So when we see the tragedies of the world, instead of just falling into the habit of going, oh my, ain't it awful? Perhaps we can bring ourselves into the consciousness of being a blessing through recognizing that there are people who are suffering, and to feel for them, to feel with them, but to recognize that the suffering is only temporary, that the suffering is only an experience that is the consequence, the accountability of the human consciousness that caused it. That we can recognize that the very presence, the activity, the wisdom, and the peace of God is right where that tragedy seems to be. And it is finding outlets right now. It is finding the helpers right now. It is finding the goodness right now. It is finding a way to give of itself. And we can know that the desire to know God, the desire to know the presence of God, the desire to know the experience of God, is now growing in this world as a result of our desire to allow ourselves to become a more complete instrument of God's peace. Joel Goldsmith, who was a modern mystic and a spiritual teacher, he died in the 60s, I believe. He wrote a book called The Infinite Way. And in it he asked his students to dedicate five official periods a day to meditation. But he also encouraged them, he called them little God breaks, that during the day, once an hour, or when the phone rang, or when something occurred that would strike your memory, you could say, oh, the presence of God is with me. And to just be open to that experience of the presence, whether it be for a second or 20 seconds or 30 seconds. But 5 times a day to sit in meditation, in silence, to open ourselves up more completely to the experience of God. And he asked that 2 of those 5 meditations a day be for absolutely no purpose. Not to try to bring our mind to think of any particular line of scripture, or to think of love, or to think of peace, or anything like that, but to just simply be. And at the end of the meditation, what he asked his students to do was to close by saying, through this meditation, a greater desire to know God has entered the world. I believe that is our purpose. to allow ourselves to come into the realization of the presence of God, the activity of God, the peace of God in our own lives, because we can't be of any use to anybody else if we won't do it first in our own lives. And to recognize that as we do so, as our light grows brighter, if you want to put it in those terms, as we do so, that the desire, the intention to know God grows within human consciousness, because we are all part of human consciousness. So where is your heart? Where is your treasure? What is it that you've come here to do? We have a day in front of us right now. And maybe we'll have another tomorrow. But for right now, for this moment, for the rest of this day, can we just bring our intention to experience the presence of God and our attention to actually seeing the presence and the activity of God in us, around us, and through us in all things? Can we keep our focus on that for just this one day? Can we keep holy the Sabbath, if we want to put it in Old Testament terms? Can we keep our eye on God? Can we turn away from the world, which is just simply a drama, an outpicturing? Can we turn away from all of that and turn to the only thing that truly matters? We have been given the ability, we have been given the responsibility, and we are ultimately accountable for what we choose to give our attention and our attention to. Choose with diligence the matters of the heart, for out of this comes the very substance of life. You are God's instrument of peace. You are God's instrument of love. It is through you and your desire to know God and to allow God to work through you that a greater desire to know God, a greater desire for peace, a greater desire for love enters the world. You are already the instruments of peace. Where there is hatred, you are sowing love. And so it is.